It's a series sponsored by 4 committees: the Education Committee, Government and Taxation, Business and Labor, and Human Resources. Our first forum was titled "What Did Measure 5 Really Do?" with Jim Schersinger, Legislative Revenue Officer, and Duncan Wise from Oregon Progress Board. And this evening we have with us our guest, Dr. Michael Kirst from Stanford University, and I'll introduce him in more detail in a moment, talking to us about what lessons have we learned from California, making comparisons for us between Proposition 13 in California and Oregon's ballot measure 5. To complete the picture of the series for you, we will be hosting an open forum, or excuse me, not an open forum, a Friday program on July 9th covering Oregon's educational benchmarks, where Dave Frohnmeyer from Oregon Progress Board will address what role does education play in Oregon's economic vision. The following week, we will sponsor a Friday program on July 16th, and Bill Wyatt will be discussing the Oregon Values Survey, Oregon Business Council's survey, where he will describe what do Oregonians value in their future, how does educational reform fit with these values. We then plan a follow-up panel, which has just been confirmed for August 20th, which will be another Friday program. We will have a panel of people who will be looking at the series that has gone before and looking at what funding alternatives are out there. If these are the values and vision for Oregon, how are we going to get there? Let's turn now to Dr. Michael Kirst, who was with us this morning. I know several of you joined in the Oregon Educational Summit, the Business Summit, this morning from 9 to 12 at the Oregon Convention Center, where Dr. Kirst spoke on the same topic and gave a short testimony. We now have the pleasure of spending the next hour and a half with him. Dr. Kirst is a professor of education and business administration since 1969 at Stanford University. He received his bachelor's in economics from Dartmouth, his MPA in government and economics from Harvard, and his PhD in political economy and government from Harvard. Before joining Stanford's faculty, Dr. Kirst held several positions with the federal government, including staff director of the U.S. Senate Subcommittee on Manpower, Employment, and Poverty, and director of program planning and evaluation for the Bureau of Elementary and Secondary Education in the U.S. Office of Education. He was a budget examiner in OMB and associate director of the White House Fellows. He's published numerous articles and books on education. There's a listing in a format in the back of the room that you can pick up. One of them notably, Schools in Conflict, Political Turbulence in American Education. He's co-director of policy analysis for California Education. It's a consortium of Stanford, UC Berkeley, and USC. And of most interest to us, during 1977 to 81, he was president of California State Board of Education during the time that Proposition 13 came into effect, so is uniquely qualified to draw some parallels for us. We did send him material ahead of time about House Bill 3565 and also about ballot measure 5, and he was kind enough to make an analysis for us that he will share this evening. So join me please in welcoming Dr. Michael Kirst.
Thank you, Donna. It's a pleasure to be here. I've really enjoyed interacting with people, and I look forward to more discussion with you. I think the California experience in Proposition 13 is very relevant. The amendments are highly similar. Both of them seem to we cut the property tax roughly in half. And my understanding is that's what you will get to when you phase it fully in. Second, we capped the property tax from any further increases in terms of tax rates. What is different from the two measures is that we could only increase our assessed values by 2% a year, or when the property was sold in California, the property went up to the current assessed value of the market. Here you can ride up on the assessed value, and if the assessed value increases, you will have some kind of leeway there that we didn't have. But generally speaking, these are the same measures done in a similar way through a vote of the people after many years of exasperation with public policy. And what you get, I think, are voters coming out on one issue with a lot of unintended consequences that they're not particularly happy with over the long run. Let me talk about some of the impacts in a minute. First, to say that from the positive standpoint of people who supported Proposition 13, they point out that it saved taxpayers $15 billion a year by 1988, 10 years after its enactment. So it was a significant amount of property tax relief that was based, I assume, on some extrapolation from our prior rates. Secondly, that money went back into the California economy, at least in part, and the 1980s in California as an economy were overall quite good. California created about an average of 300,000 jobs, and the state's population grew by 6.1 million in the decade of 1980 to 1990. So that's about 3 times Oregon in that decade alone. So you have the impact of this proposition hitting at the same time that you have some significant growth in the economy and tax relief going on at that time. To what extent those are related, we don't know. As you know now, California's economy is in significant decline. We have been losing jobs. We're really still in the recession. Consensus of business economists is that we will not come out of recession till the third quarter of 1994. So it's not clear as to how this played out in terms of economic stimulation. Let me leave that issue aside because I'm not really able to put that in detail, but I think we need to think about the basic theory of this, which is not only to save people money in property taxes, but that supply-side economics and tax cutting leads to economic growth, and that certainly has been the theory behind it by some of its proponents. Now, the impacts on education some were immediate and some were more gradual. It's hard to see how any of them were terribly positive, with some exceptions which I'll point out. The first impact, which you have already experienced partially in Oregon, and which you will see much more of, I would predict, is the shift to state control of the system of school financing and ultimately to more parts of the education system. When we did Proposition 13 and passed it, the public by 2 to 1 did not want an increase in state control of education. They wanted property tax cutting, but they did not like losing local control, and they were not at all confident in Sacramento's ability to run a vast system of 4.6 million pupils. But what they got was state centralization. The state immediately controlled 88% of school funding. The equivalent figure in Oregon, I understand, is 77% or the high 70s. Because what are you doing? You're cutting the property tax. That's the mainstay of the local tax base for schools and for maybe other local public services. And therefore, all of a sudden, the legislature de facto controls the property tax because they control the spending and they were supposed to replace it, but they can choose how they replace it. And of course, in Oregon, what the amendment did not touch is the amount of money the state was already putting into the Oregon finance system, the basic school support fund of 33%, and the state can decide how to cut that. So the state takes over financing. The locals have no options in the future. The property tax is capped. The only tax that the local schools can levy is a property tax in California and Oregon, and they're all at their maximum rates by state constitutional law. Therefore, if you desire more spending than the state average, or whatever the state doles out in the lowest common denominator sense, there's no way for citizens to tax themselves significantly or any significant way to do that. So the finance control passes. And in California, what passed to the state as well, and the state politicians loved it, and I must say I enjoyed it somewhat. I was president of the State Board of Education because we were a fairly obscure state agency. All of a sudden, we got all the power. If you got the money, we've also got most of the power. So anybody that wanted anything from the schools eventually that cost money went up to the state capitol to see the state officials because they had the money. So the lobbying changes from lobbying local school boards and doing local tax votes to state-level lobbying. And of course, the state politician said, well, I'd be happy to hear hear your complaints. By the way, I'm running a campaign fundraiser, a cocktail party. It might be nice if you contributed to that. So a huge amount of political money flowed into California to the state politicians because they controlled the school financing system. As they began to increase their control of the school financing system, we implemented the rule, the so-called golden rule. He who has the gold sets the rules. And in that, the California Code began to extend. People kept saying, well, if it's all state-controlled money, we need to control and make these schools more accountable. So the state passed many more restrictions on the schools. That's something you do not need to repeat, and I would hope you would not repeat in many ways in the future. When I left California, they were discussing, for example, what the content of teaching in sex education should be about date rape. They get into the details of the curriculum there. They have banned smoking areas from any school. We control the number of fruit trees on school grounds. Our education code is 11,000 pages long. And if you're going to try and innovate in that, I mean, that's like that. It's very few people now can lift it. And so you really have, I think, a total shift to state control of crucial parts of your system. The big choice you have is you gave them finance through the vote. Are you going to give them more power? And if you're not, how are you going to think about limiting the power over the details of the local education program? You need to think about that because over time it'll build up if our experience is typical. Now the second thing that happened in the short range, also happening here, was this is a golden opportunity to equalize the financing of the education system. The first thing you're confronted with in the state, like California was, well, let's see, Beverly Hills is spending twice as much money as this district next to it. Should we give from state money? Why would we give from state money twice as much to Beverly Hills as Baldwin Park? What is the rationale for that? Well, none. Therefore, we'll over time level Beverly Hills down. Since we don't have enough money to build the low spending districts up much, we'll give them a little bit more money in the first couple of years, and then we'll level the rest down to the statewide average. And that's what happened, so that over time we equalize financing. And we began to move the districts closer together, and now we have incredibly equal funding. We have 95 to 96% of our kids in spending of a $200 band before you put in adjustments for special needs kids like handicapped kids. And so we have that, and as I'll get back to, we're now 41st in the nation in pupil spending. So we have highly equalized financing, and it's at best equalized mediocrity. And we have virtually no way for districts to get out of this level. To go back to Beverly Hills, I went to the Beverly Hills Education Summit in January 1993, sponsored by the city of Beverly Hills. And one of the statistics in California is that we're 50th in the nation in spending for school libraries and school librarians. And we took a tour of the Beverly Hills High School Library, right next to Century City. Hardly any books in that library after 1975 in the Beverly Hills Library. So even those districts got hit with it fairly hard. So the leveling down. So another crucial choice you want to make is, how much are you going to level down your high spending districts? And when you do that, watch out for some particular factors that we really, I think, made a big mistake on. In leveling down these districts, we did not and have not adjusted for the fact that it costs more to run a school in Portland than it does east of the Cascades. There are uncontrollable costs of labor, salaries, and operations and maintenance that means it costs more in certain areas. So when you equalize in dollars and don't adjust for costs of education, you are really hurting the urban areas. So you're better off in rural California than you are in urban California running a school at this point, because we do not adjust the dollars for cost of education. We do adjust, as you do, for the numbers of special education pupils or the number of pupils with special needs, but we don't adjust for the fact that a dollar doesn't purchase the same amount in this state, and that's a really crucial fact. Second, The districts that came into this to get leveled down, where they got less money from the state than the bailout, also had high salary schedules for their employees. There wasn't much they could do with that in the short run, so they got caught with big cuts, high salary schedules, and no adjustments for the uncontrollable costs. Portland City fits all of that background, as did the city of San Francisco, which had the same profile, and the city of San Francisco has really taken quite a big hit in this regard. So adjust for uncontrollable costs and look for leveling down in terms of how much you want to do, and because you probably won't have the money to level up, and in the short range. You may in the longer range, which we'll discuss in a minute. Short range meaning the first 2 or 3 years, which you've already undergone. Okay, third was the cuts. Now this happens in gradual decremental terms, as the Oregon phase-in is doing. And one of the problems that local officials got into in California was there was a lot of sky is falling rhetoric, and the public didn't see the sky fall immediately. They saw the following array of cuts in the early years, and therefore lost confidence in their local government officials. They had already lost confidence in the state officials, but somewhat the overstressing of the impact by local officials undermined their legitimacy. Initial cuts were in summer school programs, elective courses, transportation, where we cut transportation dramatically, and it is not unusual for a school not to have public transportation. Very few do. And we cut in the high school and junior highs time in the school day. We cut from 7 periods to 6 periods to 5 periods, which in turn hit the elective courses. And we're now back down to 5 periods after going up to 6 during some boom years in the California 80s. Next, we cut the theory of education cutting is usually cut away from the classroom. So you begin cutting counselors. So I have two kids who went through California public schools. None of them ever went to a junior or high school with a counselor. Then you cut libraries, and you eliminate the independent study ability of libraries. Then you cut music and art even more, and you hack more at the extracurricular programs. Then you try and put on some fees, which we did. You start charging for the gym towels and the football equipment, until the courts or somebody sues you in the courts, which they did in California, and the California Supreme Court ruled that all fees violate the California Constitution of Free Public Education, that if it's school-sponsored, it's a school thing and you can't charge for it, and you can't say that the football team is not part of the school. So we ended up having fees briefly, and then having them ruled out of order, and we now have no fees in California. Now, very quickly, you get around, but not within the first 2 to 3 years, to dramatic increases in class size. At some point, you have to do that and teacher salary cuts, if possible, in terms of whether that's possible. And school maintenance really takes a beating. Most schools in California look pretty run down, not well painted. They're not very pleasant places to look at. I talked with an Oregon television station which was going down there to study this and show some pictures, and I said, be sure and take some pictures of what the school buildings look like, because maintenance is an easy place to quote, take a cut. It's away from the classroom in that regard. The result of all of this, ironically, when we passed Proposition 13, we were 17th in the nation in spending per pupil operating expenditures, not counting construction. That's very close to where Oregon is now. We are now 41st in the nation in spending in California. That is unadjusted for our high costs. The only states below us are former states of the Confederacy and border states around the Confederacy. And if you adjusted for that, we feel we might go down to 46th in that for some of those states, because, you know, again, it costs a lot more to run a school in coastal California than Alabama, Mississippi, Louisiana, and Florida, and a few of those states. Florida's actually passed us now. Now, so that was the impact in those terms, and we ended up with the second largest class sizes in the country. Most of our class sizes are between 31 and 35. Palo Alto, California, the home of Stanford, California, kindergarten there is in the 30s. And that's viewed as a well-off, top-of-the-line school district in regards to California. We spend about $5,200 per pupil. New Jersey spends $8,800. The great state of New York spends $8,100. I mean, they're in another league. Pennsylvania, my former home state, $7,400. Camden, New Jersey spends more than Palo Alto. Any of you that have been to Camden would find that rather astounding in that regard. So that's the level we got at. Now, in doing this, we did not restructure substantially the way we deliver schooling. And that's something that you need to think about in terms of how you restructure it. And there was quite a bit of discussion about ways to do that this morning and ways that Oregon schools are already doing that. But we basically preserved the same delivery system, not a lot of use of computers, not a lot of use of schools within schools, which were mentioned today to cut down the size. We have been using some cooperative learning where students form work groups to help teach each other, but those are not widespread. So if you can't keep up in the class, which is very big, and you tend to be lagging behind, you're in really some difficulty in this setting. So rethinking the delivery system is important, and I think that's another choice that you want to do, and your House Bills, the 3565 is really a good start on that, I think. Okay, now fourth impact that I want to talk about is that, and this really hasn't come up at all, is that kids, somebody calculated that children, including the time they sleep, spend only 9% of their time in school. 91% of the time they're either sleeping or not in school. So you want to look at what happens to other public agencies which deal with kids outside of schools, because children bring problems or successes into school. And in that area, we in California deliver most children's services other than schooling services through county government. Cities in California do virtually nothing for children except arrest them and turn them over to counties. They also run juvenile halls, and they may run some recreation programs. So county health programs were cut, mental health programs have been really cut, child care programs cut, recreation programs cut. So you see the infrastructure around the school deteriorating, and I really feel that that's very important for kids. And you want to then look at this not just as a schooling impact, but as a children's impact, and think of this in terms of children's policy and how these various programs and governments interact. And in that regard. So that was very important. The cities in California are the best off of local government. They were able to charge fees. Since public education cannot charge fees, cities raised parking taxes, permits, they taxed movie theaters, they taxed hotels, of course, at a fantastic rate. They raised their transit fees. They charged fees for every transaction they could possibly think of. And they ended up much better off than school districts or counties. On the other hand, cities do not deliver services in California to children. And we have actually had cities giving money to the school district. Beverly Hills city government gives money to Beverly Hills Unified School District. The Palo Alto city of Palo Alto has raised fees and given the money to the schools. Because of that. So you want to look at the differential effect of units of government. And in our case, the units of government that deal the most directly with children took the biggest hits. And the units of government the least involved with children, city governments, took the least hits. So that's an important area. Now, how have we tried to cope with this? And then I'll wrap up quickly with, if I were Czar of Oregon, what I would do to sum up here, since I can get on a plane and go home, and I don't care what I say here, in regards to what I would do. Okay, we tried to cope with several mechanisms. One was parcel taxes. The Prop 13 and Measure 5, as I read it, says that it puts limits on property taxation based on value. They call it ad valorem property tax. California soon figured out, well, we could tax every piece of property at the same amount per parcel, $150 for every parcel, and that doesn't violate an ad valorem tax. And so we have passed some parcel taxes. You can't get a whole lot of money out of that, It stops the bleeding and for temporarily or slows it, but we have been able to pass some parcel taxes, not a lot because we require a 2/3 vote for almost every tax increase, and we have numerous parcel taxes over 60%, but very few getting 2/3. Second, we have started school foundations, and we got 100 in the first year after Prop 13, and we're now up to over 300. And we have a great deal to tell you about how to run a school foundation, how to raise money on a voluntary basis from parents and plug it into the school district. And we have faced, I think, every issue going there. Problem with foundations is they don't raise a whole lot of money. They're usually in the 2 to 3% range of operating expenditures. Number one. And number two, they vary, of course, by community identity. The more community identity there is, even without regard some ways to the wealth of the community, the more you can raise money from a foundation. But districts which span several cities have never been able to get foundations going in California. So it's very uneven, but it has been a lucrative issue, and one of them you have to decide is, do we let the foundation form around the school or around the school system? The parents are interested in where little Johnny goes, not so much all of the Portland public schools. So how you sort that out is a very important issue. And a lot of our foundations have compromised by saying you can give some money to the school, but you have to also donate some to the district as a whole. Others have gone, in various combinations depending on what goes on. So foundations have been another area. And a third coping mechanism is fees on new homes. We have charged the construction costs for schools and some of the infrastructure costs to the new home price. So my daughter, who's 25 years old and is buying a house within the next 2 weeks, her house price is $20,000 to $30,000 higher at her age to support these fees because there's no public money to do this. So we're taking, I'm sitting here at 54 fat and happy, and they're 25 scrambling around paying for things that in the past were paid by fees. So that has been an area. A fourth coping area has been more collaboration among units of government. One of the things that happens is that you find out that, we need to put the health program on the school grounds. We have a very ambitious program in California of what we call school link services, where the schools are linked to all kinds of other public and private services. Schools are open 7 a.m. to 5 p.m. There's a health program there, recreation, preschool. Those are funneled in through city and county government. And we have city and county government outstationing their workers who are downtown and high-rises on the school grounds. And we are building closer collaborations between these agencies. So there are ways of delivering public services which make them more accessible. These are more like safe ways for children rather than 6 ma and pa stores that you have to ride around on county transit to get to. So there are some ways that you can do with that, and those have been coping mechanisms. Okay, let me wind up quickly. What would I do if I were czar? I would try as much as possible to shift the discussion to what you can get from outcomes in school finance. Traditionally, school finance is around books, teachers, inputs. As was suggested today, Oregon ought to step back and say, what would we like our pupils to know and be able to do in these subject matter areas? You already have that outlined in 3565. And what would it cost to get those kinds of outcomes? Because I don't think you're going to sell much more solely on inputs. So shifting to outcome discussions, take some of the better programs that get good outputs and say, what do they spend? Second, you need to create some ways to implement 3565. As I indicated today, the crucial thing in implementation is time for people to plan and change. They can't do this strictly after school in brief periods. So you need some planning time, some staff development time, and some change money in the system. What you get into in these kinds of situations is that everything discusses negatives rather than how we can create anything new out of this situation. So everything is how bad it's going to be rather than how good we can make it. Next, to deal with the urban areas, I would adjust financing for the uncontrollable costs of education that I spoke about earlier. I put such a system as a consultant in Florida. If you imagine Florida, Dade County at the bottom, and the Alabama border, Georgia border at the top. Those are very different economies. We had an index of 110 for Dade County, and then we went down to 87 on the index up near the Georgia-Alabama border in Florida to deliver the same level of resources. If you don't adjust for that, you're really dumping a whole lot of money in Florida into those schools in the Alabama-Georgia border. And I think that is important, particularly from the standpoint of the Portland schools. Next, to look carefully from the standpoint of Portland at the impact of the current high salary schedule, which is high because of the city is high, and how that affects it, how you get hit, I think, harder with that in the other areas. As far as the revenue side, you have to look, obviously, at a whole bunch of options. Basically, when you look at this from the outside, it was almost predictable sooner or later, just as ours was predictable sooner or later. When you milk a particular tax too hard and you don't change it, and we milked the property tax in California very hard. In fact, we were increasing the take from the property tax during the 70s at 10% a year or more. So house values, some of you know about it there, house values would go up at 10% a year, and the local units of government would say, we're not going to raise your tax rate. But they were just collecting 10% more in that assessed value increase, because in California we assess immediately with every change in values. When you milk it too long, you get a revolt. And so you need, as we do, a more balanced tax system, I think, among the various income, sales, and property. Over the longer run, you need to preserve, and this is my final comment, the right of people, in my view, who are in local school districts, that if they are not happy with lowest common denominators funding doled out by the state of Oregon, that they have the ability to go to their voters and say, will you give us more money? We're currently talking about something that I don't think would work here at all, but we're talking about a piggyback local income tax. In other words, you can put a percentage for your school district could vote a percentage on the California income tax, which is just collected by the franchise tax board and rebated on a per pupil expenditure basis of the state average, so it's equalized back to the district. We're also talking about county level sales taxes for education, which you, I guess, have the authority in part to do, and of course other tax changes, loophole tax changes. If you don't do that, you're welcome to help our tourism industry and come on down, take a look around. It is not a real pretty picture. I don't think there's anybody in any leadership position that thinks where we are now, 15 years after Prop 13, is a good place. The question is, how did we get there and how do we get out of it now? You're at the early phase. What you need to practice is preventative medicine. This is a disease which will not show all over the body immediately, but will spread fairly rapidly. With that, let me close and take some questions at this point. Yeah.
When you talk about things like either cities funding the schools or foundations or even this local income tax that you mentioned last, how do you then still deal with the issue of equity between high wealth districts and low wealth districts?
Well, very quickly we got to we equalized the system pretty much after the first years of Prop 13. You're probably well on the road to doing that. By now, our overwhelming problem when you're sitting there at 41st in spending is a word called adequacy. You get to the point where you're willing to trade off a little equity for some adequacy. The foundations you can do nothing about. I don't think so. I think if you try and equalize or do something about the right of citizens in America to give their private money to whomever they want, I just don't think you can do that in America, so you just live with that. Parcel taxes are a problem. They don't raise a lot of money, and I would like to see them in some ways equalized more. The income tax we would equalize. We would guarantee the same. If you increased your income tax in California by 0.25%, you'd get the standard amount of the average of California. So every district, no matter how much they raised with that 0.25%, Palo Alto or East Palo Alto would get, say, $300, $400. So there's ways of equalizing these various devices. But there is, at some point, a trade-off on this, and your concern is well-founded, because after you've gone through hell to equalize your system, you don't want to put a whole bunch of gimmicks in to disequalize it and get right back into the same pickle you had. So I think that is a concern, and there are ways to adjust for it, but you can't do much with the foundations. And my view is it hasn't been enough money to, it's 2 to 3% of, sometimes 5% at the top of expenditures. But the adequacy issue, there is some trade-off there. And what California has gotten into is it's bad for any school district to spend more than another one. And, you know, the theory of finance equity is it's okay for District X to spend twice as much as District Y as long as District X is it's taxing itself twice as hard. That's an inequity I can live with. If you tax more, you spend more. Otherwise, you cut off all the local ability to begin to have higher aspirations, and then you cut off the ability of the lower spending districts, who eventually start trying to keep up with the Joneses. Yeah, Clem?
In terms of teacher salary differences and collective bargaining, traditionally in this state, collective bargaining can be done in each individual district. What happened in California as a result of Prop 13 to the issue of salary negotiation?
Right.
Did you change your collective bargaining
Right.
law? And if so, what kind of change?
Okay, that's a great question, because a logical discussion was, now that we have essentially state financing, why don't we have state collective bargaining and statewide salary schedules? Because of the state setting it up. Answer is no change. When you talk to the legislature in the cocktail lounge about that, they will say, that's the last power we want. We want that agony down locally. We'll take all the rest of the power, but they can have collective bargaining. Why would we want that coming into Sacramento? So the legislature has to want that agony, and they're not dumb and they don't want that agony. So that's the last power that locals will reside in. So you get into a problem that no state, no legislator in his right mind wants that, and that's something you can fool with at the local level, is their reaction. Secondly, you get into a question of who would bargain. In our setup, you have the governor, but he's a Republican. You have the legislature, which is controlled by the Democrats, very close to the teacher unions. Who's going to bargain between them? You have an elected state superintendent of public instruction, who, until he was removed from office, was feuding with the governor. It's very confusing to set it up. So I don't know how you could really run collective bargaining very well at the state level. I don't know any state that's taken it over. Hawaii has it, but they have no local school districts. And southern states, as you know, have a minimum teacher salary, and you can do that. And then the rest of the districts can level up from that if they can. But I don't see collective bargaining moving to the state level in California, and I haven't seen it move in any other state. And that would be my view of that. That will be one of the things that locals will be able to continue to have the authority to do.
Just one follow-up. Have you seen any trends, either in California or other places, to put springs on the state appropriation, X% for salaries or for instruction, these types of things that, in a sense, put the framework there for which the bargaining takes place locally?
Yeah, there's the frequent charges, as there is here, that not enough money is going into instruction. So there have been various bills to specify and cap the amount in administration. There have been various, there are rules about how many administrators you can have compared to teachers and things of that sort. They've tried some of that, but found that it's not a terribly effective control. We haven't gotten into that level, although we do specify minimum class sizes, which are a joke because they now have to waive them all because we're way over the minimums. So we have state waivers for that. That's one thing the state board does, is waive the minimum class size rules.
You mean maximum?
Maximum, sorry. Yeah, maximum class size rules. So, yeah, not a lot of that. No, not a great deal of that. Some nibbling around the edges. More reporting and accountability of results and regulation of teacher evaluation. Very detailed state laws on how teachers should be evaluated. That they'll get into in great detail. Yeah.
Michael, would you repeat the question? Excuse me. Would you repeat the question?
Oh, sure. Okay.
What happened to your great state system of public higher education and your community colleges? Because California truly was a national treasure.
Yeah, the question is what happened to the higher education system. I can only partially address that, and I can't claim to really have studied that in depth or lived through it. The place that I know the best are the units of higher education relying on the property tax, community colleges. Community colleges took the same hit we did and in elementary, secondary, and we had at that time a very weak board of governors of the community colleges. It was not a strong governing body in Sacramento because community colleges have been built from the bottom up off the property tax and really were built as part of the high school system. Centralization took over in community colleges. Centralization of financing, centralization of control. Pretty soon the legislature began to specify what courses they could add and subtract. It specified payment rates for various courses and began to heavily control the system. The community colleges took some cutbacks over time and really are unable to meet the demands of the citizens. I mean, there's all this complaining in California about these immigrants who don't speak the languages and all that sort of thing. We have people, huge queues, that cannot get into community college to learn English. I mean, there's thousands of people in Los Angeles that would like to learn English, who are adults, we're talking about adults now, who cannot get those courses because we simply cannot offer them. So the community colleges have been scaled back, and now we have fees on the community colleges, and we have differential fees. If you have a bachelor's degree already, we charge you a very high fee, which has led to a huge enrollment drop among people who have bachelor's degrees in community colleges. They thought they were going to make money on this in Sacramento, and it turned out to be they didn't get much money at all. Sometimes they're not as smart as they think they are, I think, on some of these projections. So the community colleges have been unable to meet capacity and have been heavily controlled. The University of California system and the California State University system had one luxury that the public schools did not have. They were not primarily on the property tax, number one. And number two, they could raise fees. So for a long time they've been trying to raise tuition. We have the basic thing now is that the population grew, but the system has not. Therefore, there are large numbers of pupils who cannot get into the system who prior to that wanted to get in, so we just can't accept everybody that's qualified. There's a formula for getting in and we can't take them. And secondly, if you do get in, and I heard some of this today about Oregon, it takes you at least 5 years to get through because you can't get the classes. So another user fee, the first user fee was not tuition charges, just you couldn't get out within less than 5 years, meaning you were paying the support cost for a student. And a number of people calculated it's cheaper to go to low-cost private universities and get out in 4 than it is to go to the university in 5, which again is what I heard today in Oregon. So that has been less affected in this regard. There have been very few changes, again, to be fair to the critics of schools, in how the university courses are delivered. If you would increase at the University of California the number of courses taught by 1 for each professor, a large part of your problem would go away in terms of your course offerings. And they're now required to teach somewhere between 4 and 5 courses a year. That's what we're required to teach at Stanford, so I'm not casting aspersions on them. But you could maneuver in some direction. So again, I think the critics of education can score points by saying, if all you do is keep the same delivery system and cut it decrementally, and then that is really not what you should be doing. And that's the long-run strategy of the University of California appears to be to raise the tuition very high, probably 2/3 of Stanford eventually. We're at 17,700. And in effect make the university quasi-private. They now call themselves a publicly assisted university. So if you can raise the tuition high enough, the people will come. Don't make the professors do anything terribly different. Then you can preserve the system somewhat as you've seen it, but you do not have money to expand it for the population. Yeah, one here.
You mentioned something which I've heard called outcome-based budgeting.
Mm-hmm.
And Oregon has, in referendums and ballot initiatives, you can raise taxes with 50% plus one vote, as opposed to maybe 2/3, like you said, in California. So there's been a lot of talk about putting some sort of referendum up that would raise other revenues.
Statewide referendum.
Statewide,
Right.
that would put the money back in the state so that they then disperse
Right.
out. It doesn't have a lot of hope, maybe, unless it has some outcome-based budgeting behind it. Have you thought through some strategies about how to design outcome-based budgeting?
Yeah, and there's quite a bit of work on this at the Center for Educational Finance, which is a national study group now at the University of Southern California. Dr. Alan Auden runs it, and he's now moving, him and his center are moving to the University of Wisconsin. Alan's a very good friend of mine. He's a very deeply committed person to public schools, and he cannot keep his children in the LA Unified School System. You know, we just had a going away party last week, and you're seeing a lot of this in California. He really feels pushed out, and he will be happy to go to the Madison, Wisconsin public schools, which are literally double the expenditure of LA Unified and much higher than Palo Alto. So there is quite a bit of work on that. It relates to saying, what do you want pupils to know and be able to do, and how much would it cost to get to that level? Now, it also includes what we call, what I don't think has worked and I don't see will work in education, is so-called merit pay for teachers. But I have a variation that we're pushing very hard that I think will work. Merit pay is that we're all teaching in this room to students, and I'm rated the top third teacher, and I get the bonus, and he's rated at the 61st percentile, and he gets no bonus or very little. I don't think we have the technology to sort out that kind of thing. What we are pushing is pay for skills and knowledge that teachers would demonstrate, not that they took these itinerant college courses, many of which are a gigantic waste of time in my view, but that they actually demonstrate what they can teach. Now, another long discussion with this group is the movement towards national standards. And I don't have time to get into this, but Clinton is proposing 4 to 5 national standards boards, and I believe we will get all of these in the next 3 to 5 years nationally. There is a national decision about to be made within the next year, maybe this year, that we need national standards. I'm going to come back to how to tie this into teachers in education. So you will see a National Curricular Content Standards Board. You'll see national standards and what kids should know and be able to do in the major subject matters: English, mathematics, history, social studies, and so on. These will be, quote, world-class benchmarked. There will be national exam standards that will be hooked to those, so that in this country, within 5 to 10 years, you'll be able to say to a child in Oregon, how'd you do in your national exam? Right now you have these tests, the Iowa test, the Metropolitan test. Nobody knows how you're doing in this game. In fact, there's a physician in West Virginia named Cannell who studied these in his spare time and called it the Lake Wobegon effect. No district or state reported they were below the national average. Arkansas above the national average, Philadelphia above the national average. They use old norms, they fake it, and so on. So you have the you'll have a set of benchmark national exams. You'll have a standard of national opportunity to learn standards, meaning what opportunities do pupils have to learn. We'll look real bad on that in California. The fourth area, and I'm going to then come back to is you'll have, I think, national skills standards. They want to cluster skills in the various areas like health professions and set up national boards for that. And last, for sure, which doesn't require Mr. Clinton, in 1994, we will have a national board for professional teaching standards. That board will certify teachers nationally. It will have a regional center in the Northwest. It'll probably have one in Portland. I'd be amazed if it didn't. And it will, these are teachers who have taught 3 or more years. And they call initial licensing of teachers is what you get when you come out of a teacher program, 3 or more years. And you will be examined, and here's what I'd pay for. Here's the 4 ways you will get to be nationally board certified. And if you were nationally board certified, like a physician, you know, you wouldn't want a brain surgeon working on you that wasn't nationally board certified. If you were nationally board certified, I'd pay you more. And you would have to know you'd have to demonstrate to me 4 things. 1, you have in-depth knowledge of your pupils. And what their backgrounds are and what they need. That's often not assessed. And usually assessment and evaluation of teachers is whether you can keep order in the classroom. Second, you'd have to demonstrate knowledge in your subject matter. That's pretty evident. Third, and this is the kicker, you'd have to demonstrate your knowledge and ability to teach. I'd call you in and I'd say, I want you to teach this unit of, would be a group of teachers would come, you're the prospect. Teach this unit of Shakespeare to 7th graders in a diverse Portland classroom. I want you to teach these books, this area of Shakespeare. Tell me how you'd do that. What books you'd use, how you'd arrange it, how you'd set up the teaching. And then you would have a couple hours to think about that, and then we'd come back and we'd examine you on that. You would also submit portfolios of your teaching, what your students had done. You could submit videotapes of your teaching. And lastly, you would have to demonstrate that you have, the last criteria, that you have been able to teach, that you have been able to work collaboratively with other teachers to improve that school. You don't get nationally board certified as a solo practitioner. They will certify next year, 1994, in 7 areas, and they will expand to 27 areas in 3 years. The National Board for Professional Teaching Standards is out of Detroit, Michigan. It's 2/3 controlled by teachers. If you're promoted to administration, you're kicked off the board. Both unions support it. Both unions support pay for what we are calling knowledge and skills. Now, those are the national unions. The state affiliates, some of them, haven't got on the bandwagon yet, but NEA, Keith Geiger also supports this. That's a long answer, and I really don't, that's sort of another discussion here. There's a lot moving on this out there. The whole thing is towards outcomes and demonstration of what you know and are able to do. And we're moving very rapidly. And I think the way to get money is to hook onto that. Rather than simply saying we need more librarians, which we do in California, and I'd certainly be willing to say it, yeah.
You've been under Proposition 13 for 15 years, and you've come up with some small coping mechanisms. Why haven't you had a statewide solution on a larger scale? Is one reason that your district lost the voters that would have supported that kind of a thing? And as a part of that question, what percentage of Californians have children in school?
Right. Yeah, that I think we're in much different shape and probably worse shape than you are. To start off with the first part of the question, Hispanics and Asians are half our child population, 1/2. Hispanics and Asians on election day are less than 10% of the electorate. Blacks are 8% of our population and 8% of our electorate. So the minorities, who are 58% of our school children, are 18% of the electorate. The majority of our electorate is over 50 and white, and it's getting older and whiter in a state which is increasingly diverse. There is a very select group that shows up at the polls in California. So we have a total mismatch between children and voting and people knowledgeable about these issues, and I think that's a major problem that we're facing. Second, given that profile then of voters, 1 out of 5 of our voters has a child in a California public school. So even if you do parent involvement and all those shibboleths about that, there's 4 out of 5 voters who get most of their information from the television. California has very low percentage of readers of daily newspapers. In fact, we're the lowest in the country in terms of the percentage of people getting news from newspapers. They basically, as you would think in a media are using television. That is a litany of disasters, usually out of the core cities of LA, Oakland, or San Francisco. It opens up with a fire, and then there's a murder, and there'll be something about some disturbance at the school, if the schools are covered at all. So that is what they're bombarded with. So we really have, I think, no big recognition of this, despite this litany of cutbacks. If you come down there, they'll say it's top-heavy with administration, and we have really cut administration over 15 years to the point where I think it's about as low as it can get, with some exceptions like LA Unified, perhaps. And they tend to generalize off of the LA Unified, the Los Angeles Unified. 646,000 students, 52 miles wide. I mean, you know, I don't know when that you would create that again, but that's what you got as the biggest district in the state. So we have 4.6 million pupils, and they're only 20%. So yes, the answer is we have not had a consensus among our voting population. We may have it among our citizens, but not among our school population, because we have a large non-citizen base. So we do not have a consensus that anything drastic needs to be done. We're getting very close to that view. The governor called a special election in 1993, this November, to have a local county option sales tax, which is the first time we've had a statewide election on that basis. They're finally waking up in there, up there, that we need to do this. On the other hand, Rich Munn said today, and in some ways you have to agree with this, in Oregon the people got us into this, and it's not clear the legislature can get us out of this. You have to go back to votes of the people at some point to do this. I really don't think the legislature will take the blame, and they're a convenient whipping post. But when you look at their degrees of freedom to solve this, they don't have much except trying to stem some of the rapid bleeding. I think you, at some point, will have to face the voters again with this issue, and hopefully soon rather than later to solve it, because I think that's really key over the long run. Yeah, sorry. Yeah. And then you're next, right? You've been very.
There seems to be some parallels in dealing with costs in the health field and education. In the health field, it seems like costs will never be controlled to any degree unless we have more in the way of preventive medicine and individual citizens taking responsibility for their health. Might there not be a parallel in education, and in particular with respect to the use of new technology in education and new learnings about education? For example, I see very little use in our schools of what we know about accelerated learning, and even what we know about students working with other students. And I would maintain that unless there's some really radical attention to something like that, you'll neither get a handle on costs, nor will you really have fine education.
Yeah, I think that I would generally agree that that's part of the solution. That we have to rethink that, and you could have mentioned that we do not substitute in any way capital for labor. We have not used in any way that way, and whether we can do that, I don't know. But capital costs like computers are basically added costs rather than replacing costs. However, there is deeply ingrained in the parents and in most people the view that good education is small class sizes and personal attention. Stanford stresses that we have 1 faculty for every 11 pupils, and people in part buy that. I have been in numerous arguments. I've testified in these school finance suits, and typically the defense argues, yes, Your Honor, we agree that the financing is unequal, but dollars don't make a difference. And also, these economists come in and they produce these studies showing that class sizes don't make a difference. And I always collar these economists afterwards and I say, I heard your testimony is very eloquent. I assume you have your pupils in a very large enrollment. Oh, no, they're at Country Day, I haven't seen one of these economists who will put his child where his mouth is in terms of these huge class sizes. So it is deeply ingrained in the American psyche, including quality of higher education. So you really have a problem there's a theoretical demand for what you're talking about, not that strong a parental demand, and somehow the process of small classes seems to be the product to a lot of them in terms of what they're looking for. That has led to, I think, a lack of real momentum for this kind of rethinking. We are doing a lot of cooperative learning. I'm sure you are as well up here. That is focused but accelerated and, well, reading recovery programs where kids are having problems and you do high-intensity programs to bring their reading level up. It is still a highly standardized delivery system. As I said this morning, the last major change in American pedagogy is when we unbolted the desks from the floor. That is the last change that spread to more than to over 50% of the classrooms. We have a professor at Stanford that studies stability and change in teaching methods, and that's his conclusion. Now, that's a very long time ago, and it isn't all that dramatic a change. And so you have to think about whether these techniques can be widely implemented, but I basically agree that over time we need to move to something of this type if we can. In the interim, just enlarging the classes the way we've done and not changing anything is really not a big solution. Yeah, woman right there behind you. Yeah.
I just want to get back to about equity and school districts and how they spend money. Did that happen? Was it moving in that direction before Proposition 13, or did it happen after? And also the way that you mentioned that the schools can find other money, is that creating a big inequity, or is it still just a small differential that might make a difference in terms of spending? And also, what percentage of children actually now go to private schools after Proposition 13?
Okay. Taking the first one, we had a court decision in 1972 which declared the California system unequal. We did roughly 50% of our equalization before Proposition 13 and 50% afterwards. We were moving, gradually and on a slow timetable, and when Prop 13 passed, we really compressed it through these differential bailouts. So from the state to the local school district. So it did hasten it quite a bit and was viewed by the equity people as a golden opportunity. After Prop 13 and we did all this, the court released us from the suit and said that California had an equalized system. Some will argue we don't. The percentage of whether these are really big money from these coping mechanisms, the answer is no. You're talking about a $27 billion enterprise in California, elementary, secondary, public education. These financing techniques I talked about are peanuts. They're really in the 2% in that range, 2 to 3% at most of spending. So they're still not doing enough to destabilize the basic equity in the system. And they haven't done a whole lot to offset some of these cuts, although they've done some things. You have smaller classes in music and art and so on in these schools with parcel taxes. Lastly, private schools. Private schools, as a percentage of California's pupils, peaked at 12% in the middle 80s and are now at 8%. There is a huge demand for private schools and not much supply, and not much new supply coming online. The only sector growing rapidly is the so-called conservative Christian schools. They have expanded rapidly and replaced the loss of Catholic students pretty much one for one. So our public school enrollment's increasing faster than our private school enrollment. There's a demand for it out there, not a lot of supply. And I'm not confident that a lot of supply will come online under the current financing techniques. So what you have is just an awful lot of unhappiness by people that feel that the system is really badly eroded, and there's not much they can do to get out of it at this point. Private schools in California report 2% vacancy. That's all. We're 98% at capacity in the private sector, without a lot of new entry coming in. It costs a great deal to aggregate land there to build a school and to get it going. And we had a long conversation about Mr. Whittle, and if we had the time, I just met with their people 2 weeks ago to discuss the Whittle program to have a nationwide system of private schools. They're backtracking real fast, and their pricing is now up to between $6,500 and $7,000 as their base price. So they're talking about quite a high price and a very slow start, And they're increasingly saying we can't afford the capital costs and the infrastructure costs to build computers in the library, and what we're going to do is see if we can contract for schools. In other words, we'll take a Portland public school, give us the per pupil expenditure, and we'll run that. So they're increasingly saying they want to be a contract agency rather than what they initially said, which was they were going to open up a massive chain, massive nationwide chain of private schools. The whole rhetoric was backing away from that, and they did not think they would make in any foreseeable future a big impact on supply of private education. I think that one will, you can do Channel 1 a lot faster than you can build a nationwide chain system of private schools, run from the top down, which would be very interesting. Yeah.
Have you seen student performance on different outcome measures change as California has gone from 17 to 41st?
Yeah, it's mixed. We have seen in the first period, in the initial periods, well, the second phase, 78 to 83, there wasn't much change. 83 came the Nation at Risk report nationally, and the view that the nation is engulfed in a rising tide of mediocrity and is unilateral educational disarmament, et cetera, et cetera. California, like other systems, tightened up dramatically at that point, and they verified the one finding of educational research, which I will now tell you, and you don't have to go to Stanford to learn it, the one uncontested finding, which is kids tend to learn what they spend time studying in school. You know, kids who study Spanish tend to know more Spanish than kids that don't study Spanish. What California did, like other states, was raise their course requirements and their university entrance requirements and channel more kids into the courses and intensive more time on subjects that are measured in various tests of all types, including science tests and so on. And we did experience in content tests some significant increases between 83 and 88 through that increment. I call that the intensification strategy. You know, you just intensify it. As one legislator said to me in a bar after they passed the act, he said, "I just want the little buggers to work harder." And that's, you know, and we did get some gain from that. That has topped out, and I think we have played out the intensification strategy, as has most states. And we haven't had a subsequent strategy to do much, so we've been experiencing declines since then. The only good measure we have, and I wish I'd looked up Oregon in this, the only really valid measure that I know of that compares states, and the SAT, as you know, is just for college bound and has aptitude elements, is a national test called the National Assessment of Educational Progress. 37 states participated in 37 states participated in this, I believe. California was one. They gave 2 mathematics tests to 8th grade pupils. And California was near the bottom, and only a few states from the deep south and the District of Columbia were below us. Now, pardon? Where was Oregon?
Well, we did do it this year. We participated last year at the 8th grade level, and Oregon, there were 3 states right at the top, and we were in that next band of states. There were about 6 states that came right after that.
Right. In those states.
And they were not
Significant differences.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Also, I should say, is of the states where more than 40% of the kids take SAT, which is true of Oregon,
Mhm.
number 1 and has been consistently for a number of years.
Yeah, so I thought it would rank fairly high. Now, you have to adjust for the backgrounds, as you would know, of the pupil populations, and California's pupil population is vastly different than Oregon, but
Our minorities, I can tell you a breakout on that too. Our minorities are better than anybody else's minorities on the NAEP, and they're still below the national average, which is the national.
yeah, right. So on the one comparative measure, it's disappointing. So you can't say that there's an immediate effect on this you know, within the first 2 years. You may not see an immediate achievement effect, but over time, we've topped out and are now in some periods of decline. But you can, by focusing the curriculum and having people study more what these exams value, including the forthcoming national exams. And California has been a leader in what's called curricular frameworks, clear signals from state to local about what kids ought to know and be able to do in the subject matters. You can get some increase from that, despite the loss in resources. So focusing what people do is a strategy which is different than the restructuring strategy that we've discussed here. This essentially, we use the same old delivery method. You just study this rather than studying that. I mean, there's hell of a lot less jewelry making in wood shop. Vocational ed in California went down 20% in the 80s and is down 30% overall. Now, you don't measure voc ed on these tests. That may or may not be a good thing, but that gives you an idea of the change. Yeah, over there.
Two really little question. Your per pupil spending is what?
Just current operating, not counting construction, is $5,200.
And then your Senate Bill 90, didn't that precede Prop 13, and that was the one that did the equalization?
That did 50% of the equalization. That was between 72 and 78, 50%, and another 50% within the next 4 years after Prop 13. So the two interacted.
Related to Prop 13 or still related to Senate Bill?
No, it was related to Prop 13, because then the state was saying, okay, we've got to finance the system as I indicated. Why wouldn't we give the same amount back to the districts? Why would we pay them such different amounts? So over time, we leveled some up and leveled some down, and that's what you're doing now. You've got districts in this state who are gotten more money now, and they're better off than they've ever been. Now that, so what'll happen is you'll get all the people in the boat weighing even amounts, and then the boat will be beginning to go over the falls a bit. So that once you even them out in that regard, it hits this area hard. You know, you're net losers right away in that regard. Yeah.
The other question to follow up on this question is this really a marketing issue that we're talking about, which was one of the things we talked about at the summit, that if you have all of these voters who have nothing to do with the schools and you want also to get into outcome-based budgeting, it's a communication problem, isn't it? I mean, telling people why they need to vote for these things is really what needs to be happening in order to get a statewide solution.
Yeah, I think, you know, the keys to change is I've looked across the United States, and I study many states, not just California, in a national research group, is money and reform. You can't just go in for money, you have to go in for money and reform. It's sort of like the schools are a set of alcoholics, and you know, if you just give them the money, they'll spend it on the same old booze. So you got to reform them while you're giving them money, and that has been the winning theme almost everywhere at various times. So now, since you've already exhausted a lot of the intensification strategy, where you say take only academic courses, the reform has to be more along the lines of restructuring or choice. Which is another angle, but you already have 3565, which is very congruent with national trends and is really quite a well-designed bill. I mean, you know, in some ways it's too bad you have it, because you could come in with a new reform bill and say, you know, rather than saying, let's just fund this old bill that we passed without a lot of fanfare 2 years ago. California and the other states have had, here's our bold new reform program, and by the way, folks, to get these bold reforms, you're going to have to pay some cash. You're in a very interesting marketing thing where you've got a real bold reform law, and you got to say, we need some cash to pay for something we passed 3 years ago. Or, you know, I don't know how that's interesting, and I'm not a marketer, but I'm sure there's people can figure that out. Yeah, and then, well,
given the grim consequences of 13 in California, how do you explain that nobody has tried to reverse it or correct it in California?
It's just become a part of Holy Writ. I mean, it is like Moses handed it down. I mean, it's part of the fabric and culture of California. And every politician became an adherent to Prop 13. It was very popular with the voters. In the early going, they didn't see much negative effect because the state had this large surplus. So they thought and they just were, and so that the impact took place gradually but significantly. And I think it's just property taxes in California and nationally. Every poll I've seen of taxes, the most hated tax, property tax. And that's why, and so I think that explains part of it. So we've been unable really to amend it dramatically, and we're now, I think, looking at options to that in the sales and income area. I think the hardest road would be that road to amend it at this point. There was also some hope it would be declared unconstitutional for the reasons you don't have, which is that we didn't reassess property that didn't change hands more than until it actually sold, and that. But the courts have. We really don't have moving anywhere there. Yeah, Jane, and then
we were talking earlier about the fact that the Michigan voters just voted down a plan that was put before them to offer a sales tax, take care of the state funding problem, offer a sales tax to have a more stable source of funding, and then some local control so that there could be some variances. The Michigan voters voted it down. Do any states stand out as good models of stable funding, adequate funding? What do you look to? We obviously don't look to California.
Yeah.
Who do we look to?
Well, first of all, the key, we've studied what's the secret of these other states compared to us, and we have in part have concluded that one of the key things, and this is that I ended on, is that all of the states that I know that are high spending, including this one, until recently, had local option votes. They had a chance for voters to go to for localities to go to their local voters and say, we want more than the state doles out. And some of them had that equalized and some of them didn't. But that is very crucial. That is the key to New York and New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Wisconsin and Minnesota. And over time you get leaders and followers. You get the so-called high-spending lighthouse districts out there, which my equity friends would like to end in some way. And then the others try and keep up with the Joneses. And you get the whole system moving up, chasing the Joneses out there. Somebody's doing better, we want to get closer to them. In California in the old days, we used to have the lower spending districts chasing the county average. You had to have leaders to have followers to keep the average up. So that's why I keep coming back to, initially you may want a statewide solution, mandatory statewide, but over time you'll have to put that back. Secondly, the property tax systems have some way of relieving the growth for the assessed value through a circuit breaker or some kind of technique that as assessed value grows, the public authorities don't automatically collect all that revenue without having forced to go to the voters for a local tax base. So that I think is a part of it. And third is that it's the old balanced system idea. You can't over-rely on a single tax or two taxes. You need some, I think, some sales, some income, and some property. And the states that have those with elastic property, California has property, but has that inelastic, elastic property taxes through local votes, some sales and some income. You see Texas repeatedly in problems. Texas doesn't have a state income tax, and that is a real issue over time down there. Florida is experiencing problems. They don't have an income tax. Connecticut passed an income tax. You need the broad base. So there's several elements, and you can't overburden any tax too hard. You're taxing income very hard. Somebody told me you're second in the country in income, and you're probably doing as much with that as you can in the short range. So that suggests some level of this orientation. So that would be the general ideas we've seen. And some of these states seem remarkably able. I mean, they just seem remarkably tolerant to high property taxes as well. I mean. It's amazing what levels they sustain to me, and yeah, well.
The Measure 5 passed, and our legislators are now wrestling with coming up with a comprehensive tax program that the voters will basically vote in.
Or out, yeah.
we're in this process, and what happened is members of the business community got concerned and called for an education summit that happened today. And I wonder if you'd comment on what you experienced this morning, what you know about our situation, and in terms of what we're going to need to do to stay on a healthy course here. Was this what did you see today, and what else do we need to do?
Yeah, right.
To keep on
Well, I was pretty heartened by today. We passed ours in '78, and the business community did not get into this issue, the big business community called the California Business Roundtable, until '82, '83, when they formed a Jobs and Education Task Force. And I was one of their chief consultants, and they said at that time, God, we'd rather work on highways and housing and things we know something about. This education issue is a can of worms, and we're not experts in it, but we got to get into it in terms of business focus. So you have a business awareness much quicker than we do, and that is, I think, very heartening. That's the good news. The bad news is these were big businesses as I saw them in a state which emphasizes small business as its base. So you're really, what we didn't get in was the Chamber of Commerce very quickly, and they represent small business and supported the California Taxpayers Association, which was moving in a different direction towards more tax cutting. Third, the big business community was very effective in lobbying, helping the education groups lobby the legislature for more money when the state had the revenue to pay more money to the schools. What the big business community has been unable to agree to or been very effective in is to mount campaigns or to even be a party to campaigns that try and persuade the mass of voters to vote in an initiative. So they're very good at lobbying in the Capitol, but that assumes there's state money to be had in the Capitol. And for a while, from '83 to '86, there was some state money to be had in California after that, and we actually moved up in spending 6 notches in that period. 6 notches nationally. So I'm really heartened by it, but I'm concerned that small business and voters are not always reached by big business organizations. And the mobilization of those other units is a different kind of game. If we're all going to be played in Salem, and the money was in Salem, and all you had to do was get it out of the legislature, I'd be really confident about today. If you have a long-term shortage of money structurally, then I'm not sure today it's necessary, but I'm not sure it's sufficient to get the job done based on what we have seen. Okay, thank you, Don.